Sup, freaks? It's your boy Marty here to introduce this rip of TFTC. Thank you for joining us. Give this video a like, subscribe to the channel. If you catch us on podcast apps, make sure you subscribe there. Give us a rating, a review. Go to tftc.io as well. Become a member of the site. Join the conversation. Truth for the commoner, trying to get you the high signal content in a world gone mad. This rip was brought to you by our good friends at River. River's here to make it as easy as possible for you to buy Bitcoin and then take it into self-custody. Go to river.com/TFTC, set up an account today. You'll get $5 of Bitcoin after you buy $100 worth of Bitcoin on River. You can dollar cost average into Bitcoin with no fees. If you're just buying one off, River has the best fees in the industry. They back all their Bitcoin reserves 1-to-1 in multi-sig cold storage. They highly recommend that you take self-custody. They just introduced limits. So if you want to set a limit order below or above the current Bitcoin price, River makes that extremely easy as well. They also have real customer support. You can pick up the phone and call them if you have any questions about your experience on River. So go to river.com/TFTC, set up an account today. This rip is also brought to you by our good friends at CrowdHealth. CrowdHealth is here to provide you with a new way to pay for your healthcare. It's not health insurance. Health insurance is notoriously expensive, opaque, impersonal. CrowdHealth is really trying to change that model. You pay a monthly fee. It builds up in an account. If you ever have a health event, you let CrowdHealth know. They go to the doctor. They negotiate the price lower. You pay the first $500 and the rest gets crowdfunded by the CrowdHealth community. They have Bitcoin Lightning payments that they just enabled. So if you want to pay your monthly fee plus your doctor in Bitcoin over the Lightning Network, you can now do that. They've got a roster of doctors that you can access. They're approaching healthcare in the right way. It's a healthy community focused on preventative healthcare and avoiding the big pharma industry as much as possible. So if you're looking for a cheap healthcare solution, you're not happy with your health insurance, maybe it's a bit too expensive, try out CrowdHealth. Me and my family use it. Go to joincrowdhealth.com/TFTC. Sign up today using that, and you'll get $50 off your first month. Joincrowdhealth.com/TFTC. Enjoy this rip. Logan just gave me the thumb up.
Cool. All right.
It's funny. We say thumbs up, but it's usually just one thumb up. You gave me the thumb up.
Yeah, you're right. Well, it's like baseball, foul ball, heads up, and everybody looks up.
Yeah. Kane, welcome to the show. We've been DMing on Twitter for years now. I'm excited that we finally got this together.
Yeah, Marty, I appreciate you having me on. I know DMs are always good, but sometimes I'm pretty good at forgetting about them, coming back to them. So thanks for having me on.
Well, thank you for coming on. What incited this was I wrote a newsletter November 20th, so 3 weeks ago now, Geopolitical Chessboard reshuffling, talking about essentially what's going on in the geopolitical landscape with countries like Saudi Arabia and China beginning to come closer together. The U.S. seems to be shooting itself in the foot from the geopolitical posturing. Many people are, for lack of a better term, getting really pissed off with the United States, particularly its foreign policy, and this will have an effect on the global macroeconomic landscape, especially as it pertains to the U.S. dollar, its reserve currency status, and the U.S. hegemony, which it has had for many, many decades now. So you were telling me right before we hit record, you've been diving into this subject more broadly for almost 20 years now, 16 years.
Yeah, I think, if I take it back, really even before financial markets, so I was a big baseball nut. Always read financial history as a kid. I mean, not financial history, but baseball history as a kid. 20s, 30s, mostly Yankee stuff. And then I think like mid 90s started coming across kind of steroids in baseball and diving down that rabbit hole. And everybody's like, it doesn't exist. And, then in 2010, it was obvious, but nobody cared. So I was an adult after college, did a couple of things kind of in the financial realm, real estate, that sort of stuff, but I always enjoyed trading in the markets and started working in just traditional wealth management, nothing special. But went down that similar rabbit hole with the financial system, how things work, how markets work, how we were trading different assets across different desks and that sort of thing. And I came in the business in kind of like, I don't know, 05, 06. So right in front of just the monsoon of 2008. And came in at Bear Stearns. Again, it was a local office, wasn't in New York. And we were doing trading and whatnot. And so just seeing it firsthand and not having any idea what's going on. And so I took that same approach, go back to the foundation, figure out how this stuff works. What is it? And through 2007, 8, 9, 10, we had some hedge fund clients, had some big institutional clients, insurance companies, those kind of things. And I started reading all the emails from just the bailouts and particularly the Lehman kind of issues and the Dick Fold emails. And then that just kind of rabbit hole, just like with steroids, into all this other stuff that I didn't understand, and credit default swaps and derivatives and gold and all that kind of stuff. And so that sort of led to the tweets and whatnot that we were talking about and going on with China and the geopolitical wars and the currency wars and all the hacking. So I'll kind of pause right there, let you jump back in and see, we'll kind of get that rolling.
Yeah, and I think China's always perplexed me. I said this, I think it was on a Spaces last week we were doing for the Bitcoin Times Energy edition. Somebody's asking me about the Chinese real estate market and whether or not it was imploding. I said, it seems like it is, but I don't know. You hear news out of China, or I do, and I never know what to believe. I think the great Chinese firewall is very successful at sort of making it so it's not obvious what's going on to the outside world. And it seems like you're honing in and have done a lot of research on China. So I guess let's focus on China, its place in the world, what it's trying to do, what its economic situation is in reality, and how that will affect the geopolitical landscape moving forward.
Yeah, I think a big picture, right? Just like you said, if you listen to Jim Chanos, who was a great hedge fund manager, 80s, 90s, 2000s, he's been short China since as long as I can remember. So if you were an investor and you kind of took his advice, you'd be out of money at this point, right? And China still exists. So short sellers are great. They're great for the markets. I agree with them. I like them. I kind of believe in that tendency. But, you can be right and wrong at the same time. And so if you couple that with, I think Ray Dalio's work's kind of the most important, and it's really what got me back into just this general interest. I mean, one thing, macro went dead kind of in, let's just call it the 2000 teens. Now macro is back in vogue, right? It's the thing. It's Bitcoin, it's gold, it's stocks, it's China, it's US, it's geopolitics. So it kind of brought it back. But Ray Dalio's work really is the foundation of that, because he doesn't say it explicitly, but when you read his stuff, he basically built most of the US financial markets. And then China kind of called him over there to build their markets. And I think at one point in some text, he says, effectively, they asked him to kind of run, one of the big committees or organizations that would kind of oversee the financial markets, and he turned it down. Now, I may be a little bit incorrect there, but I read something around that in some of his works. So he kind of built their market. So if there's one guy that knows how all this stuff works and has relationships around the world, it's him. And so you kind of have to trust that and kind of lean into that. And so to take it one step forward, just big picture without jumping down the rabbit hole, his work says civilizations last on average about 240 years. That's where we are. Reserve currencies last 70 years, 100 years, give or take. That's where the dollar is. And so then if you look at that cycle and technology and how that plays in, we're in the realm of all that. And so education and technology in the U.S. is kind of going like this. Yes, everybody comes to the U.S. to invest in technology and that sort, but Europe's ahead of the curve. China's ahead of the curve. Trump's administration, I think it was like 2017 or 16, they did a deep dive into the financial system and what we need to do to digitize it. Well, China's been 5 years ahead. Europe is 3 or 5 ahead, and we're just getting started. And that's where all like the Fed now and all that kind of stuff's coming from. So you look at it, you say, well, why would China want to do this? Well, they've been the sweatshop to the world for 30, 40 years. And they're kind of at a point where like, hey, we're big enough. We have enough cloud people. We have enough partners. Like, we don't, we want a seat at the table. And the G7 used to be the G5. We want to be a part of this decision-making process for the global financial system. And, Europe, US, kind of Japan, the other big players are like, nah, it's all right. You just keep going making the stuff. We'll let you have a little bone, but like, we don't need you in this. Kind of classic, just, buddy system. And so that kind of gets us where we are today. And when you look at kind of, there is no such thing as a dollar. It's just a basket, right? It's the greatest financial network there is because we can use it anywhere, but it's a component of other currencies. So if the dollar's going up, those currencies are going down. If the dollar's going down, those currencies are going up. And so then you kind of step into the 70s, and that's when the financial system was really kind of breaking down off the back of Bretton Woods. And they created this, what was supposed to be a digital token, the SDRs, special drawing rights. And that was, again, a basket of currencies for central banks to trade back and forth IOUs. With the dollar was a central component, and then a few other people. And guess who finally got a seat at the table? China. And so when you think about it that way and you look at it that way, that's exactly how, in my opinion, and people can debate it, I could be wrong, the U.S. took power from Britain in kind of the late 1800s, early 1900s. So you kind of have a confluence of a lot of different things coming together where it's just like what we've seen before.
And then building on that line of thinking, if you fast forward from the 70s, obviously Triffin's dilemma played out. Mm-hmm. China became the sweatshop of the world, right, as you described it.
And we, in fairness, we were in the early 1900s, 20s, and 30s.
Yeah. Yeah, but the Industrial Revolution,
right?
Many stories of child labor here in the United States. And so just that repeat itself. And so I guess you have that 50-year transition where you hollow out your industrial base, move it somewhere else, flood the world with dollars, but then that industrial base builds up in China, and gives them a lot of power to then try to wield, which seems like they're trying to do right now.
Correct.
Yeah.
And so to me, it's interesting. It's also scary because they have a different, outlook on life than kind of we do here. There's different political systems. There's different value systems. In some ways, their value systems are better, right? The Eastern medicine, Eastern healing, Eastern, like, hey, let's value our time on earth and let's, last samurai. It's all about honing your craft. And then in America, it's like, dude, how do we just do this quick and easy and make a lot of money? Right. Mm-hmm. And so spiritually, kind of honing your craft is what we're supposed to be doing rather than just trying to get rich. So there's just butting heads.
Yeah. So where do you think it stands right now? Like I mentioned, the newsletter that you responded to, I believe I mentioned in that the Saudi Arabia, I believe head of foreign affairs came out with a comment in regards to Israel and Palestine and said, hey, we want peace in that area. We're going to try and broker it. And our first stop's going to be China, which is a big signal. Like it's not the U.S. To go to the police officer of the world, which the U.S. has been for many decades. So that's a signal. And then in that same week, shortly after that, I think that announcement happened on a Friday. And then next Monday it was announced that Saudi Arabia and China had opened up a currency swap deal with each other, relatively small, $7 billion over the course of the next 2 years, but it is a step in a particular direction away from U.S. dominance. So what do you think is happening? You think China, Saudi Arabia, Russia, others are recognizing how overextended the U.S. is and are making some tactical moves to fill that void?
I agree with that. So that's why I respond. And from time to time over the years, I'll respond just lightly on some things that you hit on. But I think that's important because on the outside, right? If you read the Wall Street Journal, they kind of tell you what happened after the fact. But like early days, if you read the FT, they kind of give you the breadcrumbs of things that are happening that end up being issues 6 months, 12 months down the road. So the news is telling us this after the fact, exactly what you said. But the importance is that groundwork and the foundations for that to happen started in around 2013 with China's Belt and Roads initiatives. So this goes back to where I opened with. So back then, and probably before then, but it became in the papers, very, big news, open news. People are just like, oh, look at that. But they were laying the foundation. So they're going around the world to Canada and getting access to oil sands and oil and energy. And they were going to Africa and getting access to all these rare earth materials for technology and lasers and things like that. And they were going into Iran and Iraq and all the different oil countries and setting up these deals. And so first thing you had to do was set up that foundation. Like, hey, Marty, I think you do a great job. Is there some way we can work together, right, and get this resource? And when you look at it that way and you kind of understand what the U.S. did in the 1920s and 30s was the same thing, is we went around the world while there was World War I building partnerships. And who did we build partnerships with? We built partnerships with Hitler and Mussolini and all these other guys that were bad people, but we had to have a way to build a relationship to create financial connections. And so there's this great, I think I shared it with you, but this image, I don't know, I found it on the internet somewhere in 2019 or 2020. It kind of describes how the U.S. took power. And from 1919 to 24, they set up this massive global American financial investment. So if you look, so we had to create this dollar network, but the world is using pound and other currencies, but primarily pound, and Britain runs things. And so then you get everybody kind of using a little bit of your money here and there, these small $7 billion transactions, right? Currency swaps, and that you didn't have swaps then. It was all gold, but there were various types of. So you've got that kind of, hey, let's just get started and see if this works. And then from 1924 to 29, you establish, and this it says, establish control over the financial system of Germany. And that's where we're like funding Hitler and Mussolini with the Rockefellers and the Carnegies. And all this is text. Like you can go back and read in different things. It's kind of, to make it simple, you could go back and watch Alex Gladstein's Bitcoin conference talk, right? A lot of that is baked in there. So why did we, set up the Red Cross? It wasn't to aid the world and help them out with medical issues and disaster. It was to create a way to get dollars into other parts of the world that didn't have access and create a debt system. So then they're burdened to you, right? It's the way to create that network and to kind of bake that into Bitcoin. Like Bitcoin's done that with the Bitcoin brand and created all these different places where Bitcoin's slowly being adopted in areas that have financial issues. And so from 29 to 33, the image, says, then you provoke and unleash a deep financial and economic crisis. Well, that's where in 2009, the world's kind of blowing up, debt's blowing up, and China's just kind of like, they've got their issues as well, but they're kind of like, hey, we have all these treasuries, we could nuke you, but then it'll nuke everybody else if we sell them. So that's where you kind of get into this, in my opinion, I call it the second greatest Trojan horse in history, where, we give China dollars for basketballs. And then they say, okay, well, like these are cool, we'll use them, but we'll just buy your treasuries and get this nice rate and do that for 20 years. And then the world blows up in 2009 and we all of a sudden say, hey, I don't know if we can pay you for 30 years at this rate, because like this is an issue. Would you swap your 30 years for 10 years? And China's like, sweet, because I don't want exposure to you for another 30 years. And so they swap 30s for 10s, and they take that cash and start buying our land. And so you've kind of got exactly what we did in the late 20s and 30s, I think it was. And then the last step, let me get this picture back up because I always have trouble remembering it.
If you want to put that picture, if you want to DM it to me on Twitter or if you can put it in the comments here.
Yeah.
We can pull it up on screen as well.
All right, hang on. Let me do that so you can edit this out. And I don't remember where I found this picture. I've posted it a number of times over the last couple of years. There was a guy on Twitter that went back and found a website. It wasn't the website that I got it from, but and sent it to me. All right, so I just DM'd that to you. So the last step, get that back up, and then I'll come back to your screen. From 1933 to 1939, you've got financial cooperation with the Nazi government and support for its expansion for foreign policy. So the way, if you look through historical text and government documents and things, that all kinds of stuff. So we set up a financial system, we get everybody indebted, and then we didn't win World War II from guns. We won it by cutting off their financial access. And so let's fast forward to today. China's kind of done most of these steps. And in a worst case scenario, like I don't want things to crumble. Nobody wants kind of anarchy. But if our civilization is towards the end and the reserve currency is toward the end, and China has set up all these financial connections around the world to get the resources needed to build and to grow, they kind of fast forward once there's a monetary system that can handle global currency. So I'll stop there, and you can kind of interject, ask some questions, and then we can kind of get to a little bit of a point around what I think is important around Bretton Woods and Bitcoin and other, just the crypto ecosystem.
Yeah. Yeah, they're setting up this infrastructure in anticipation for a vacuum of power, and then the infrastructure will be able to suck that power in their direction. Another thing I mentioned in that newsletter that incited this conversation, I forget exactly which country it was. I forget if it was in Africa or Latin America, but they're going to issue loans to countries that don't have great dollar liquidity. They're going to issue them dollar loans, but they're asking to be paid back in yuan on the back end, which is
right.
A roundabout way to drive yuan demand.
So what is that? Not to jump in, just because that's a critical point, very critical. So what is that? To me, that sounds like, hey, we're the Red Cross. Here's some disaster relief.
Yeah. You need dollars. You need to go buy some stuff internationally.
Pay me back in renminbi or yuan.
Yeah.
Right.
Yeah. So that's one thing. And I guess before we jump into like where this could go, like China's, in my mind, extremely hard to read. Like you can see a scenario where they're doing all this, but domestically things are terrible and they could shoot themselves in the foot. Like if you look at going back to the real estate crisis in China, it seems like it's materializing just like from first principles, seeing the videos of these ghost cities over the last 5-10 years that have been erected, that they're ghost cities, they build them and nobody lives in them, and you have all this exposure to the real estate market that seems extremely fragile. Like, do you envision a scenario where China's trying to do all this, but they just went too hard into bunk economic policies domestically that it prevents them from?
It could totally be that. So I don't follow it as deeply anymore. I'm a little bit perplexed on that point because on the one hand, you got a bunch of empty stuff. What are you going to do with it? Now, in World War II, we kind of had that same thing. We've got all these goods that nobody's going to buy. So when we call those soldiers home, like, what do we do with this? And we built a middle class. And so in China, they've got so many people, as most of the population is over there, right? Between China and India, 8 billion people, and most of us over there. So you got all these, in one way it's smart, right? In the US, we kind of do it dumb. You need a 4-lane highway. What do? We build a 2-lane road, let it cause traffic jams where it takes an hour to go anywhere. And then we come back and spend 3 years making that 2-lane road a 3-lane road. That gets, filled up again and we got traffic jams. So now we'll spend 2 years making a 4-lane road. Well, China went ahead and was like, well, we have however many billions of people in the hills of China that are making $2 a day. We're going to build a 12-lane highway that has 1 car on it and an empty city. And eventually those people will come into the city because that's where commerce happens. Now, Does that play out? Possibly. I don't know. That's where kind of like, for me to try to figure it out, there's not a way to kind of make a living off of it. So I just sort of stopped.
Well, that begs another question too. I know we're using historical parallels here, but does the current situation as it stands today in 2023, like, are there, like, it feels like the world's more hyper-connected than it's ever been. Does that variable really prevent like history from rhyming in the way that it did in the past?
So that's where, like, my answer there is, I think that's what's important about money, and that's what's important about Bitcoin, and that's what is important about understanding the Ray Dalio big debt crisis and the changing world order. So the simplistic way that I think about it, and I kind of say to people, and I don't know if people understand it or not, or if it even makes sense to anybody but me, but like, money changes when the lifestyles and the speed of which people need access to money changes. So if you look at money, gold is the only money ever to last throughout mankind, the only one. Every failing civilization has had some form of a faster money that broke and got levered and rehypothecated and whatever, and then they default back to gold and it starts over. And so when you look at, again, the early 1900s, 1930s kind of happened because gold wasn't fast enough anymore to meet the needs of the roaring 20s and people, deindustrialization, like how fast people were moving around. So I wrote an article on that for Bitcoin Magazine maybe a year ago, and kind of talking about that. And so then we put these dollars on top of gold, and that worked until the 50s. And then, digital technology came in, and we're starting to do some things digitally, and then dollars couldn't move around fast enough. So we created this thing called the credit card network, which was tapped in to the dollars, which were tapped into the gold. And then in the 60s, we got the internet, and we're starting to get some information flowing back and forth over the internet. And so then by the 70s, the credit card network and the dollars and the gold didn't work anymore. And so that's where we created in the 50s the SDR and kind of this digital thing, and ACH and Fedwire. ACH, Fedwire, all those things are just protocols. So if we think of, they're text-based protocols. So if you think about what we're seeing now is like, wait, we have this digital network, Bitcoin, that solves the problem that that the major countries, Japan, US, Europe, were trying to solve in the 70s, that will do all that. And we also have these things called cell phones. So I don't have to fly all around the world to have these meetings that we can't do anything about till 3 days later. We can get on Zoom. You and I can have this conversation. So you bake all that in, and so the speed with which people are moving around, we have global people, like you and I can go on a trip to China tomorrow. We have global commerce, corporations. They might be U.S. companies, but they're headquartered in Ireland because it's a tax haven. Microsoft, all those guys. Or we have a bunch of Chinese people that have bought, and Chinese individuals and corporations that have bought up U.S. corporations and land, right? And so, but our money doesn't work that way. And then most of our lives, we spend it on Netflix and YouTube and Facebook and Zoom and other things like this podcast, but our money doesn't attach in, but we have that 402 protocol that everybody gets all yipped up about, right? And so that's how, if you got the TCP IP layer, it's just information that allow voice and video and all that stuff. And now we have this Bitcoin layer that's a protocol on top of these other two protocols, but this one actually carries text and value. And so now you can use those parts of the internet, like before you couldn't use VoIP, VoIP, and video and all that, to better speed up transactions. Now, I'm not talking about it and the transaction per second with credit cards and kind of like the unsound parts of it, but people in business are moving at speeds which our money can't. But now we have these tools to make our money and create a level of soundness, right? When civilizations change, that soundness, we have to come back to a soundness, and everything has to get redistributed. And to me, I think that's what we're seeing. And if you look at the SDR basket, I posted a video, not a video, but it was something about like the history of the dollar, and you could just see it moving a couple of days ago. And it was a visualization, and you can see the currency war playing out for the last 100 years. And in the last 15 or so, you see China bringing back their seat at the table because they're now in that through the SDR. So does that kind of answer your question there?
Yeah. Well, I think we can dive even further down it, because that's one of my theses. Like I put a probability on it, but I don't think it's a foregone conclusion. But like that, what I've been saying is like, yeah, the dollar, it seems obvious. Look at the federal debt. Look at the unfunded liabilities. That's a math equation that cannot be solved. We're not going to fix the dollar. People are starting to recognize that. We weaponized treasuries 2 years ago or last year when we froze the Russians' treasury assets. And people are looking for an alternative. You have Saudi Arabia, China, Russia, India, others buddying up to create their own SDR, their own basket of currencies, whatever it is. So I could see a situation in which dollar dominance declines and they try to do their basket, but it is fraught with the same problems that led to the demise of the dollar and every fiat currency before it up to this point in time. And again, going back to what we just discussed, which is this hyperconnectivity, like, I don't know, maybe I'm naive to think that the hyperconnectivity would allow information to disperse, where if the BRICS countries tried to do that, people would be like, why are you doing this? We just did this with the dollar and every fiat currency before. Like, how does this not end in the same way? Like, why don't we just use something like Bitcoin? But I could see a period where they do that. They're somewhat successful for a period of time. It implodes. Maybe it's not 80 years. Maybe it's 10 years even. And then people are like, oh, no, Bitcoin's the obvious answer to this. And that's the perplexing situation that we're in, because if all these countries were just to swallow their pride and recognize that Bitcoin is a superior technology to do all of these things and just to adopt it as quickly as possible, they could solve a lot of the problems they're trying to solve much quicker.
Yeah, I agree with that. Like, that's kind of the dog chasing its tail, you know. But if you look at, again, to take it one step back to a little bit of a spiritual thing, if you read the whole Bible, so when the world got messed up in 2020, I grew up Christian believer, all that stuff, but I never actually read the whole thing. So in 2020, I was like, well, I only know one book that is messed up enough and has enough messed up stories that kind of might explain everything. And so when you read it cover to cover, you see everything we're seeing now, but thousands of years ago. And when you kind of go back and let's just say you were a history buff, which I never even liked history until I got into financial markets. And by trade, I'm a technician, I'm a chartist, magic lines, and people are like, oh, it doesn't work. Well, it doesn't work in traditional markets because they're so massaged and manipulated. I mean, look, the Fed's own data, the Federal Reserve and New York Fed says we've been in a recession for a year and a half now, but we just changed the definition. And so this human psychology is embedded in every price of anything that we trade. And so when you see Bitcoin and just the broader crypto space, because that market is not as massaged over the last couple of years, you're seeing some of it. You get natural price action, and the magic lines work great. And so the dog chasing the tail kind of component is every time civilization has changed, we go back to a sound money, and over the next 80 years, and this is where the fourth turning kind of comes into it, we make the same mistakes, and that sound money eventually becomes unsound. Now, I know it would be a little bit unpopular from the Bitcoin perspective to say that Bitcoin, will ever become unsound. But since man has been on the earth, that's happened to every money that we've ever had, except for gold. And Bitcoin does a lot of the things that gold can't do. So possibly Bitcoin becomes just like gold. And, but in that realm, if there's a fear, it's like if you look at gold, it went nowhere from 1980 till 2007. So for 27 years. And that was kind of from the suppression and the tools like futures and options and ETFs, and the ways that the traditional banker and the traditional politician that everybody's so excited that they're Bitcoiners, they live by the rules that are outlined in Tragedy and Hope, live by the rules that are outlined in Power and Control. And so for them to be involved in money, to me, is kind of a bad thing, right? And that kind of helps these transitions happen. Now, hopefully they're good and I'm wrong. And hopefully like Bitcoin solves all these problems and we can kind of get back to a world where people can just focus on living and working and doing things they're passionate about rather than, spending so much time on the hamster wheel. So that was a long-winded way of saying, when money changes, we get those periods of 30, 50, 70 years where it's sound, but over that same time, it starts to become unsound again. And generally, when you see that, you get the civilization change.
Yeah, and I think that's the hope with Bitcoin is that it's, you reference the Bible, and Eric Kaysen and others have described Bitcoin as Messianic money, like a gift from God to fix these systemic problems with our monetary systems that humanity has had for thousands of years. And again, it could be naive, it could be too optimistic, it could be too idealist, but I do like to appease the idea that Bitcoin is that messianic intervention.
Yeah.
Maybe you don't even have to get biblical about it or spiritual about it. You can just,
Well, I think when money breaks, okay, so broken money is a symptom of broken principles and values. People will live in a world where principles and values are broken. We've been living it since 1980. But they will only pay attention once the money breaks. Once the inflation gets so hard where they like can't stick their head in the sand anymore. Just remember the steroids conversation. Like around 2005, people were like, oh yeah, there's steroids, but I don't really care because I like going to a game where they hit 10 home runs because a 1-0 pitcher's battle is pretty boring. Right. And I don't really care to see a guy steal bases, but if he can hit 3 jacks in a game, like that's what I want to go to. So people will live in that world comfortably because we like to be comfortable. We don't like to be uncomfortable until the money breaks. And so that's where, not to be biblical, but that's where you take it and say, where's the common denominator between Bitcoin as a money? It's rooted in core principles and values. Immutability is like, you can't change this, you can't do this because the code says it. But when you look at the Bible, it says you can't do these things because the code says it, because the laws of principle and value and work says it. Because that's kind of really our purpose, is be on the earth to work at whatever skill we have, whatever passion. We're not here to make and collect money. So that's, to me, the correlation that's really cool about Bitcoin. It resets, hopefully, our entire civilization back to doing things that matter. Like, you're passionate about all the things at 1031 and TFTC. Like, so you're part of that principles and values. And that's really what, like, even though they basically just brought the European financial system here, but that's what the founding fathers were about. George Washington, those guys were, Alexander Hamilton, were passionate about getting away from the evil and the rooted and the brokenness of money and starting again. Now, unfortunately, they just took the same financial system, brought it over here. And if you follow that paper trail, that's why the BIS is calling the shots and the Fed's just the execution arm.
Yeah. No, that's the hope too. Like going back to what we were discussing earlier with China, going out in this Belt and Road Initiative to set up all this infrastructure just to eventually have the world reserve currency and get all that power. It's a lot of work. It's a lot of time. It's a lot of capital. It's a lot of politicking just to have some sort of advantage within the monetary hierarchy. And I'd always wonder, like, obviously, the meme Bitcoin fixes this. It's like, what would the world look like if the global superpowers didn't have to politic and strategize that way. They were just able to operate on a monetary protocol that was apolitical, that nobody had control of them. None of them did. And so then they're forced to go focus on more productive endeavors outside of this chessboard positioning.
Yeah, exactly. And I think to kind of bring that back, and one point you made about weaponizing the dollar, right? So that was, to me, it was game on. When was the hearing where Zuckerberg was at Congress and they were like, taking him around, pretending to beat him?
For the Libra stuff?
Yes.
That had to be 2019.
Yeah. So I saw one snippet and I posted it, and it's the most important snippet of all this. And he basically backhands a senator or congressman or whatever. And the guy says something to the effect of, son, I don't think you know what you're messing with. We use the dollar as a weapon to force other people to do what we want them to do. And he said, and Zuckerberg said something back like, I respect that, and maybe I don't know what I'm doing, but I do understand that if you don't do what the world needs, you'll be forced to do what you don't want to do, or something like that, right? And the guy had no idea what he's talking about. But to your point, that's what the dollar is now, is just a weapon. And we saw it with Russia, and we saw it with China. And so that's what money in a political system always is just a weapon for control. And so to tie that together with China, right? So, and to tie that together with the image that I sent you about the steps that the U.S. took to take that power, right? So we do all these things between 1900 and 1940s, and then in 1944 we have Bretton Woods. Once that dollar network is established, and raise our hands, say, "Hey guys, I know we've been the sweatshop of the world, but let's just have peace, and we got this thing called the dollar. It'd be great because then we could all just more easily transact." China's doing that now with the swap line, right? And so somewhere we're having our Bretton Woods 2.0 conference, but I don't know about. We'll read about it once it's done, and maybe you know about it or whatnot. But I think the smart countries, the global South, and this was kind of the tweet that got us, or DM that got us back talking on this. The global South, in my opinion, if they were smart, and I think this is what China realized that our politicians that have been asleep at the wheel don't realize, is with something like Bitcoin, we can live in a world where multi-currencies work. Look, there's 180 currencies in the world right now. I think that's the number. They don't work because they all depend on the dollar. Dollar goes up, those guys punish. Dollar goes down, those guys have a heyday, right? And that's where Triffin's dilemma comes in. You either support the world or you support yourself. And we're at that juncture. So the global South, these smaller countries, can do these loans with China to get off the dollar, but now have a currency that nobody controls that they could use to be more productive, so it's like Bretton Woods 2.0, right? And that's the importance of stable coins. The importance of stable coins is that they effectively bring back euro dollars, which are broken. That's why the Fed changed from euro dollars to SOFR, because they no longer had control of the money. I wrote an article in Bitcoin Magazine about that right before, it may have been after Luna, but it was before, the whole crypto ecosystem blew up because of FBF.
It was LIBOR to SOFR, right?
Well, yeah, but LIBOR, but all financial systems are based off LIBOR. So the whole euro dollar market functioned around that LIBOR pricing, and all that scandal was, I think, 2010 or 12, when they had all the, congressional hearings about desk propping up and pumping up LIBOR to mess around with the rates market. So what the Fed, taking a full circle a little bit or a step back here, what the Fed missed is what technology did to interest rates. In the Fed's mind, interest rates control the world, but they don't, because most people don't have a loan. They don't need a loan. And once technology kind of post 1990s reached a point where you could start a business in your bedroom with a credit card and have an $800 a month, rent. And that's all you had, because somebody in the Philippines is shipping your product and you're creating it online. So you got no overhead. You don't have this inventory. There's no longer a need for rates for most people, right? Now you can buy a home and all that kind of stuff, but by and large, they don't. So you can move that rate all around you want, and it doesn't work. And so that's what Greenspan, in my opinion, kind of broke or misunderstood. So you get into 2008 and you're like, well, this stuff doesn't work anymore. What do we do? And so they're massaging it with these desks, and it all comes to light. And then Department of Justice puts some of JP Morgan's traders in jail for manipulating gold markets, right? But people don't care. So meanwhile, China is in the background, just kind of like, okay, well, we're still going to be the sweatshop, and we're going to open some agreements so that they can come in and sort of, fox in the hen house and be like, look, do you really trust these guys? They clearly don't know what's going on. Like, I'll give you a swap line if you want to use some money. Now, China's, back and forth, bans Bitcoin and then unbans it and then bans it again. And so you don't really know. That's the chess match. But, there's just a lot of things that point to it's a new environment, right? 40 years of rates down. What if we went 40 years of rates up? Most of the stuff in the U.S. doesn't work anymore.
No, it's becoming abundantly clear, which is. And so with all of this in mind, we've been focusing heavily on China and the power moves they're making. As an American citizen, somebody cares about this country. What do you think America should do as all this is going on and Bitcoin exists?
I think, again, like you said, care about America. You grow up in America. We love America. Everybody loves it. It's still, of all the places, like just look at the COVID lockdowns. Where would you have rather been? As bad as it was, right? You probably, I would guess, rather be in America. And we don't get to pick where we're born. We're all born into, and so we all have different ideologies that we believe in because of where we were born. But once you're born, you have the opportunity to move around, and people move to America. So I think how do we fix that is, one, we get rid of 90-year-old politicians. I love old people, but after the age of 60 to 65, most of the decisions that you would make on a forward basis don't match what the generations behind you will need. You're a great mentor. You can say, hey, I've already beat my head up on that wall. Here's the shortcut. Let me help you get there. You go, to me, that was what 2008 was about. It wasn't about global financial crisis. It was about half the workforce wanted to do everything on a yellow notepad. And the only way you did anything was write on a yellow notepad and drop it in the UPS and ship it to somebody. And somebody physically picked it up and put it on somebody else's desk. The other half of the workforce was like, you spend 3 hours doing that. I'll do it 10 minutes with an Excel spreadsheet, and then I'll take the day off, right? No, you've got to have people work. So that's how, to me, the U.S. fixes it. Is like, stop putting all of these bureaucratic red tape so, Pelosi can have an internal trading desk. Like, let people be productive. So make money and systems and business work where people can produce. Remember, get back to the fundamentals and values and the reason why we're here on earth. And I think when you have sound money, that happens because people aren't so focused on income. They're focused on production. So when I talked about The Last Samurai, great movie, right? Remember, did you watch that?
I'm ashamed to admit I've not watched Last Samurai yet.
This weekend, homework. It's great. So Tom Cruise, he's an American warrior, and they go in and I think it was Japan. They were trying to get rid of the ninjas. That was their army, ninjas, right? It was like trying to get rid of cowboys. Would you rather have a cowboy or just like So U.S. takes guns in and like, hey, why aren't you guys fighting hand-to-hand combat? You could just shoot everybody and stand on the hill. So he gets captured. He's a fierce enemy, and the other general of, I guess, the knights, I mean, not knights, but the ninjas, he realizes, he's like, I recognize that guy. He has the same passion and hunger that I do. So he brings him back to his camp and learns from him. So like you and I, we grew up in a democratic world. We believe in democracies and people having freedoms, but we can learn from, good and bad from other societies, communist societies or whatever. Like, So that was kind of the two sides that were polar opposites started learning from each other, and they became friends. And in that, Tom Cruise learns basically the ways of a ninja. And it took him like a year. And he would just get his butt kicked every day. And he started to notice when he went around the village, like, wait, this guy is, looking at every grain of wheat. He's not just like bundling up grain, throwing it because he can sell it real quick. Because that's what we are now doing in America. And so Bitcoin and kind of China and the value system is more of like, look at the guy that made our microphones, right? He probably just painstakingly goes over every inch. Maybe he just throws it in a box and sells it. I don't really know. But so the reason why I say that movie is important because he finally has his, they're in a, like, they do practice, like ninja practice every day or whatever, warrior practice. And the whole entire world slows down and he sees the moves before they happen and he finally beats the guy. And so then he's like, I'm not a, US warrior. I'm like a true value system warrior. And so he goes on and like fights a battle and they all get killed by the US people sitting on the hill shooting a gun. So, or actually, I think he may have lived, but all of the other warriors get killed. But they had like, 100 guys versus 2,000, and they almost won.
I need to go watch that movie.
Yeah, it's great. Sorry, I ruined it for you.
That's all good. I'll watch it anyway. Yeah. You said something interesting there. Like, what really matters is production, not how much money you make, especially under a sound monetary system. I think that's important to really internalize, is if you're able to increase production by really bringing back opportunity cost and making more efficient capital allocation a thing that actually exists, which doesn't exist now because of the manipulation of interest rates. People are more productive. Hopefully prices go down and you don't need as much income to survive and thrive in this world. And you can lower your time preference and focus on these things that you're passionate about and bring actual value to the world.
Yeah, and I think a key question I think everybody should ask themselves, right, if you have kids, do I want to teach my kids values, principles, and work habits and skills that they can use at 20 and 30 and 40? Or do I just want to hand them money? Right. And so today, it feels like the common belief in America is like, let's just hand them money. Yeah. It doesn't, that's probably the worst decision that we could do. But if I teach my kids a real skill, not saying they have to go be a plumber or carpenter or whatever, but if I teach them how to do it, at some point, they will use that skill to build something, to do some work that matters. And sure, like I'm as guilty of as anybody else, like focusing on income. Do I have enough? Like my neighbors just got a new house. I should get a new house, like all that kind of stuff. But I think to answer a little bit ago, you asked like, what could America do, is like in our education system, and Dalio touches on this, teach skills. Now we're like reading Macbeth and all that kind of stuff 3 times over. And I'm sure maybe there's some stuff in there that is a skill, but like teach skills because skills build wealth. Money doesn't. Money most often destroys it. I mean, like that's part of my career, is being involved in wealth management and seeing how money impacts people emotionally.
Yeah. That's one thing I'm very happy my father did at an early age. It wasn't necessarily teaching me skills. I guess that's the point I'm trying to make. Maybe you don't have any skills to, like, I'm not going to be able to teach my kid how to do woodworking or anything like that, or change a motor. I don't have those skills, but maybe I could learn with him. And like below that, just instilling work ethic. I started a paper route at 12 years old.
So you have a skill and you do it, right? It's building businesses or help people build businesses or finding investment opportunities, right? There's money and income that's involved with that and it's lucrative, but it takes real skill to be that kind of leader that can go help people figure it out. And so if you're dragging your kid along or your kid's seeing you do those things and make those sacrifices, I mean, all I can say is my business partner kind of introduced me to the phrase "more is caught than is taught." So
More is caught than is taught.
you may not be verbally teaching your kid anything, but every action he or she sees you do is teaching them everything.
Yeah.
And that's the thing, that they're not going to remember what you said or how you said it. They might, but they're going. And I see, as my kids get older, I see them do stuff, and I'm like, I know where they got that. It's sometimes good, sometimes bad, right?
No, it's something I'm hyper aware of now. Is my oldest son? He's almost 4, and he's becoming hyper aware of everything around him.
Yeah, that's about when it is going on.
And it's scary. It's not scary. It's like, it really makes you contemplate, like, all right, what example am I setting?
So let's put it that if parents, and I go to a men's group, and there's a whole, I can send it to you offline, this guy's phenomenal, but we spent 52 weeks on money. We talked about money starting in like week 48, right? Because money is a set of principles. That's why Bitcoin's awesome. It's not a number. It's not a digit. We're on wisdom. Again, it's a biblical thing. And like, we go through Proverbs, and if you read the first 7 Proverbs, just 7, and apply those every day, there will be no issues. So and a large part of it is if parents so today, parents, how we fix America, parents have to take back control. The school is not there to teach my kid. The school is not there to get my kid a job. The school is not there to make sure my kid learns to make an income. I am, right? So if we teach them, more is caught than is taught, right? If we teach them those actions that lead to it, then everybody will be successful, they'll be productive. Work will happen, because that's like the core thing we're supposed to do is work. Put here to work, do good, be good. And, we can't all be bazillionaires. We can't all be millionaires. And when it comes to money, like, there's going to be poor people and there's going to be rich people. And those people that figure out how to be rich, they should, and this is what corporate America is missing, they should do the hard lifting of creating the business, starting the business, to hire people, right? Because that enriches those people to do work. And they should send down appropriately fair amount of money so those people can have great things in their life and improve their life. And in the last 20 years, you're seeing CEOs hold all that money at the top, and then creating and intensifying that hamster wheel. And that's what, like, it happened post 1971 with dollars, right? Is the exponential rate with which the hamster wheel sped up.
Yeah.
And now we're at that point where it's just completely broken again. People will pay attention when the money is broken.
Yeah. And that's the thing, like, it's a bit messed up because everybody does want to be rich now because they think that's the only way to live comfortably. And if, like, you could solve the problem of living comfortably on a more modest income, then you wouldn't have everybody trying to be rich. Like, and going back to, like, do you want to, more is caught than is taught? And, like, just don't give your kids money, give them skills. Like, thinking of the TikTok generation.
Values, principles. So TikTok is very important. I am extremely anti-TikTok.
Yeah.
Because I've done my homework, and it is a Chinese backdoor. And there was, I forgot, the government or somebody looked into it, and, who's partnering with it. It's okay if Microsoft owns it, but not okay if, I forgot the parent company.
Tencent.
Yeah, Tencent. But in America, TikTok flips videos that waste your time and don't teach you a skill. So what are you catching? Junk. The Kardashians, the housewives of whatever, like just pure junk. In China, supposedly, their 14 to 16-year-old, they have like a limited time they can use it. But what is it teaching them? Like engineering, math, skills. And so there was this poll. I didn't do deep research, so I just assume it's true, where they polled like the average 14, 16-year-old in the U.S. What do they want to be? An influencer. They polled the average 14, 16-year-old in China, the TikTok users. What do they want to be? An astronaut. Like, which one of those two civilizations is going to be better in the next 40 years. And that kind of fits into our empty cities and all that kind of stuff. It's like if the cities are empty, those kids will figure out how to build it. Do you think a influencer other than Mr. Beast or whatever is running around in Africa doing the oil or water wells? But who's going to win there?
Yeah.
If you're going
like
to
it's going to be us.
Yeah, if you're going to Vegas and those are your two options, which one are you putting?
Put money on the engineers.
Yeah.
Every time.
Yeah.
It is. It is scary too, especially when you consider the social climate here in the United States, and you could see things devolving rather quickly. Though I'd like to stay white-pilled and optimistic, and I do believe that things can change rather quickly if people do wake up. And I do think inflation pressures are forcing people to ask hard questions that will lead them to wake up to all this is broken. We need to fix it.
I agree with you. Staying positive, right? Now, I tend to like come across as negative, and I just kind of like dive deep into the foundations, and it becomes very clear like what the problem is. But most people, like the steroid thing, well, there's steroids in the PGA. You can go look at people's driving distance, and it's not all because technology got better, right? An athlete is not better at 33 than they were at 25. It's not possible. Your 1 out of 50 will be, right? Your genetic makeup declines starting at age 27 for the male. And actually, I think it's before that, but whatever. So you, I just drew a blank where I went with that. Because I got off tangent. What was it you said?
We were optimistic, staying optimistic.
Oh, yeah. So staying optimistic is building those habits back into everything that we do. And that's how we get out of the mess. And if we can get leaders in society to kind of push back a little bit, and people will start to wake up and be like, oh, well, maybe, I don't need to just go on vacations and sit on social media all day. Like, I'd rather take some time off and live a life.
Yeah. We need something like JFK's school gym curriculum. Get healthy people. And we need better leaders too. When you look at all the politicians, the 90-year-old politicians giving speeches, they're so obviously vapid, and their speak is just pure politics speak. It's nothing inspiring. It's nothing worthwhile. It's all projection and propaganda. That's one thing the world is really lacking, and people are finding it in independent media. That's why they're going to places like Joe Rogan and Jocko Willink and Jordan Peterson, Huberman, whoever it may be. It's because the people at the helm of the political apparatus just aren't providing that. There's no
that's
inspiration there.
Propaganda is an interesting word, right? It's very interesting because now if you believe anything that wasn't put out by the FDA or the Fed or anything, like, you're just a propagandist, right? You tinfoil hat guy. But if you go read The House of Morgan, okay, and it goes back to the 1800s and it walks through how JP Morgan was built and blah, 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 and all the funding of Mussolini and Hitler and all those things, right? In the 20s, guess what that was? Propaganda. They actually use the terms conspiracy. One of the guys, I totally drawn a blank here, that set up the Federal Reserve. There were two competing Federal Reserve plans. The one that won was from a German guy that came out here to bring banking to the United States, whose brother was head of the German CIA. Well, okay. That doesn't not sound like somebody we should put in control of things. But point being is now, you're a conspiracy theorist in 2020. You and me, we're conspiracy theorists, right? And this is where it sounds negative, but it's really positive. So 100 years after all those things happened in the 20s, 30s, and 40s, there are documents, government documents, information that say, hey, this was going on. These things that in that day people said, that's not right, you shouldn't be doing it. And they were like, oh, you're just conspiracy theorists, let's shut you down. It is now known to be true fact. So in 2020 and post 2020, most of the things that we're finding out, even look at the COVID, the way the narrative around that has shifted. There was a Wuhan lab deal. There were scientists that leaked stuff, all that kind of jazz, right? Most of what Fauci talked about was not true, but it's still conspiracy, and we're conspiracy theorists for talking about it. So when enough time passes that people forget, and this is what the fourth turning talks about, then we start to say, oh, wow, that was bad. You know, what was conspiracy is the truth more often than not. And what is claimed to be the truth in the moment tends to be what is really the conspiracy when you go back and look at history. And so I think that ties into this whole conversation about dollars in China, because China realizes that. And that's sort of where I think TikTok is kind of that avenue to create that division, and how do you win in a sport? You understand the rules, you understand the other team, a little Sun Tzu, and then you devise a strategy that either confuses or creates division. And then you go do your thing and you win.
I was pulling up a tweet that I want Logan to pull up, because I think Dave Collum defines conspiracy theory the best. I am a conspiracy theorist. I believe men and women of wealth and power conspire. If you don't think so, you are what is called an idiot. If you believe stuff but fear the label, you are what is called a coward.
Yeah, that's perfect.
That's like when you break down the actual definition of a conspiracy theorist, it is somebody who's making theories that men and women of power are conspiring to do things, which, if you don't believe that they are, you are an idiot.
Yeah, and you're not willing. So this is where proof of work comes in, right? You're not willing to go back and do some study, do some work to understand that things that happened and transpired, how they happened, how they transpired, and then what the real truth was. So like, we should all be conspiracy theorists. The whole idea that science follows a scientific method is just rendered completely false by 2020. Yeah. We didn't create a hypothesis, test it. We just jumped straight to the test.
And this whole trust the science thing is just completely anathema to the whole idea of science in the first place. You have a hypothesis, you test it, and science is an ongoing intellectual exploration. It's not set in stone. And I think It's Always Sunny in Philadelphia clip's been popping up recently, or Mac. Yeah. Just goes through history of Galileo, Aristotle, Isaac Newton. It was they were the best scientists of the day. Everybody thought they were the smartest people, and they turned out to be a bitch.
and a lot of those guys, right, they were right on a lot of things. And a lot of those guys, they ended up in jail for a period, or just completely ostracized and blackballed.
Was it Aristotle or Socrates?
I think all. Yeah,
starved to
death.
death.
Yeah, Tesla too, I think. Anyway, so that's just sort of, I think, the big, where we get back to the positivity, the big opportunity. And hopefully people in our power and our leadership will realize this, and they'll stop putting the brakes on Bitcoin and just the general crypto ecosystem. So, not to say a dirty word, but financial services is huge. You could be a hedge fund, you could be wealth management, you could be a derivatives trader, you could be a rates guy. So crypto ecosystem is saying financial services, right? Mm-hmm. Within financial services, there are base layer assets, there are risk assets, and there are toxic assets, right? And we're just kind of at the base layer asset. Now there's some risk assets and some toxic assets in there, but we're there. So to get back to being positive, how do we look through that? We say, well, how can this benefit the people, and how can it generate work and jobs and things that we can focus on? And for smaller countries, global south, second and third world countries, that's what U.S. was. But we were smart enough at that point and had real leaders who realized we can create a dollar network and get our seat at the table and become a leader throughout the globe and help set standards and policies. And so that's the opportunity with Bitcoin, is for those smaller countries. It's a way to opt out. It's a parallel network, so they can stay in if they want. Maybe one day it becomes its own network, but own like single financial system. But there's no industry that has one winner. There's always multiple players. And having a parallel network gives people options. So you participate or you don't, or you cross, in from one market to another. And that's kind of what China's doing with these, dollar loans that return in renminbi and yuan.
Yeah. And that's something I become more passionate about too, is particularly for Americans listening to the show, which is the majority of our audience base. We're international. We have a global audience, but the overwhelming portion of it is here in the United States. And I don't know the exact answer to it, but I think history has proven that it's possible. It's like, don't wait on the government to do this. Bitcoin's open source. Rights are taken and defended. They're not going to be given to you. So the government's not going to give us these rights at the end of the day. Yes, they could create a somewhat lax regulatory environment to make it as easy as possible to go do what we want to do. But at the end of the day, it comes down to the individuals actually building on this thing, and then more importantly, speaking up and fighting on behalf of it in the battlefield of intellectual debate. And like I really think that is the most disheartening part of the United States of America in 2023 is everybody's so dependent on the government and the central banks to fix the problems that are inherent in our system. And it's just completely insane to me, because it's very clear that they created the problems in the first place. And to think that the arsonist is going to put out the fire is nonsensical. It's literally insane to keep doing the same thing, going to the government, fix this, fix that, and expecting them to do it when they've broken everything.
And that's where there's one thing that backs money, nothing else. Right? It's two, but the same thing: faith and belief. When you have faith and belief in something, you get it done. When you have faith and belief that somebody else will accept this unit, whatever it is, you pick acorns. If I believe that Marty will accept acorns for the book on your shelf, and you believe that that acorn's worth more than that book, you'll accept it. But you will only accept it if you believe and have conviction that whomever else in your circle will turn around and accept it when you need a candy bar or whatever, right? And so faith and belief is all that, in my opinion, all that backs money. But what's important about that is faith and belief is all that backs anything. So if you have faith, strong belief, strong conviction that you have the skills, more is called than is taught, to do good work that will generate income, you'll go do it. But if you're filled with fear, which unfortunately is what governments know, because in the 20s, they started doing psychological studies on people, and they carried that through to the 60s, where they did the really big ones at Stanford, and they created this thing called the internet, where they know exactly what we're searching, what we're looking at. So they have a very deep picture into our psychology. And now the way the information and money travels around, they know what we're buying too. So they have like this intense, stranglehold on fear. And the average person, as you look at, again, take it spiritual, we don't have to get that way. But if you look at the decline in spirituality, it follows the dollar. It looks exactly, the two charts look almost identical. So if you got a population, a group of people globally that have less conviction, faith, and belief, and more fear, who wins? Doesn't matter what money you use.
No. And I have belief in faith in Bitcoin because of the underlying principles of that. It's scarce, it's digital, easy to verify, easy to secure. And that gives me faith to accept it. And then,
and it was working, because to me, that's like the whole, scientific method. Well, it's not really going to work in the West because it's harder than a credit card to just walk to the store and go. But if you go to Africa, where a dude doesn't have access to a bank for 100 miles and he's got to cross an anaconda and 2 tigers or a lion, what's he going to use? A Nokia flip phone with some Bitcoin on it.
Yeah. Very simple.
So do your 7 steps scientific method in those regions of the world that truly need, banking access, because it's not a problem in America. like in Europe. And there are parts of banking that are broken, but bankers are always going to be around, and they're always going to do what bankers do. And, financial systems have been involved since whatever the 1300s. Yeah. So that's kind of it. Yeah.
It's been great.
Enjoyed it.
I did too.
Hope you enjoyed it. Is
there any parting notes we should leave the freaks with?
Go find faith and belief and conviction in something, right? More is caught than is taught. If you have kids, teach them. If you have friends, teach them. Teach them through your work, and hopefully that catches on and people are more productive. I do a podcast, Navigating Bitcoin's Noise, a little shameless plug, nothing great, just the way to have general conversations.
Don't sell yourself short. It's nothing great.
And write on Substack, just Kane McGukin.substack.com, and just primarily when things hit me, like your email, were some important points. And don't get too caught up in the noise and the fear, and just kind of be who you are.
Be who you are. Comes to the noise and the fear around Bitcoin, just always remember there's only 21 million. Governments and central banks can't stop printing money, and people need a solution. It's very simple.
That's great advice.
Yeah. All right. That's all we got today, freaks. Kane, thank you. Long time coming. Glad we got it. Glad we got it in the books. We'll do it again some point in the future.
Let's do it.
All right. Peace and love, freaks.